So the theme of our practice period, suggested by Junka Ken, and it's a really good suggestion, is committed lay practice. Practicing deeply in the middle of the lives that we actually have. Not trying to create some new imagined life in which we're some other kind of person doing some other kind of thing. And not feeling like our practice in our busy lives with jobs and kids and retirement accounts or no retirement accounts and all that stuff is like in any way less than somebody whose life circumstances were such that they are living out their lives in a monastery somewhere or a residential center. And it would be easy to feel that way because we have a huge raft of impressive Zen literature that pretty much says that over and over again, or implies it very strongly, because it's the monastics, and pretty much the male monastics too, sadly, who are popping into nirvana while the rest of us slog along trying to get to work, But actually, if you think about it, it might be that Buddha's sense from the beginning was to try to do what we're doing would be too hard. And the only way to really do meditation was to quit all that, leave home, camp out with him, have the simplest possible day routine where you don't, not only do you not work for money, you don't even touch money, Your lay supporters handle all that, and you can pretty much meditate till your butt falls off every day. And you had no relationships either. And of course, it doesn't mean they didn't have relationships, but that was the rule. So we're taking on something actually that's really pretty impressive and maybe sort of unprecedented, And we're part of an experiment that's really quite new, 60 years, 100 years, depends on where you start the clock. There were some really interesting West-East, East-West interactions with Asia, where actually Asian Buddhism kind of tried to remake itself in a way to kind of fend off the Protestant missionaries. So it's not just the 50, 60 years since Suzuki Roshi or someone like that came here, but not that long, not that long. With rare exception, it's a pretty separated system where the lay people are practicing for sure, but their practice is to support the monastics. Their practice is it's devotional, it's ritual, and it would be a rare day that you would see anybody meditating. So we're taking on something pretty interesting, trying to do committed lay practice, so it's good to explore what that might be. And Ken found an interesting book for us, which I was taking a look at. It came in the mail yesterday. The Bodhisattva Path, Thich Nhat Hanh. It's commentaries on 2 different Mahayana Sutras. One is a well-known one, the famous Vimalakirti Sutra, which is a whole book-length story about one of the few serious practitioners who were not monastics, a fellow named Vimalakirti, who was like a businessman and all that, but, super amazing. Probably made more amazing as they wrote the stories down. But there's also a second sutra in there I'd never heard of, that Thich Nhat Hanh calls the Ugrapariprccha Sutra. There's like a double C in there, I'm not sure how to say. And this one turns out to be a chapter from a much longer sutra that's kind of a collection of Mahayana Sutras called the Maharatnakutra Sutra, which is that seemed vaguely familiar to me, and it's because inside that one is the famous Sutra of Queen Shrimala, which is one of the few traditional sutras that is completely about an enlightened woman teacher who's also a queen, it's just like, so it'd be great to study Queen Shrimala sometime. But Thai picked a different chapter, which is also sometimes presented as a sutra. And it's about this committed lay practitioner, and don't worry, I'm not going to steal your thunder, Ken, because they're all going to forget what I say anyway, as they will forget what you say, so you can just say it again in your way. It's never a problem in Dharma teaching if you repeat. It's actually a benefit. I've learned, it took me a while to learn that. lightens the load a little too. You don't have to be like original all the time. And actually, Thich Nhat Hanh is somebody I really admire in that way. I mean, he said a zillion, many different things over his career, teaching full time for however many years, 60 years or something, 70. But he really stuck to his message, didn't he? You know, mindfulness. You know, right here, right now, this very breath. And was a fabulous scholar of Chinese and could dig deep too. Also pretty free to say it the way he wanted to say it, in service of his basic message of mindful, loving awareness. But anyway, I read a little bit of the beginning here, and I thought it might be useful to just touch in on what happens first in the sutra, because it seems relevant to what we're doing this weekend. I guess at the beginning of the sutra, the lay person who's in conversation with the Buddha, his name is Urga, like many sutras it's a conversation, is asking the Buddha, how should lay people and monastics practice? And so the Buddha lays it out. And the first thing he says is exactly the last practice we did last night and one of the first practices we did this morning. He said the lay practitioner should take refuge. That's how they should practice. The quotation is, to begin with, the lay bodhisattva should receive the three refuges and practice taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Notice the word practice and the word receive. So we're letting something in and we're practicing the refuges of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then he goes on to say, well, what does that mean? You know, which is a really good question, you know. We should always keep our beginner's mind, even if you've been around here forever. What does that actually mean, you know, to take refuge in Buddha? Well, here's what the Buddha said on this occasion. When you take refuge in Buddha, you must truly want to become Buddha. You should feel, I want to take refuge in you, but I also want to become like you. I want to be a Buddha, adorned with the 32 beautiful signs. Only then is it appropriate for you to take refuge. So you have to have big aspiration to take refuge in Buddha. It goes on. If you should say, I take refuge in the Buddha, and for countless lifetimes to come, all I can do and all I want to do, all I can be and all I want to do is hold the hem of Buddha's robe. That's your aspiration. Then you'll never become a Buddha. If you think, if all I can do is be a Shravaka, means voice hearer, and the most I can ever realize is the fruit of arhatship, then, according to the teachings of the Mahayana, if you have such an attitude and practice in accord with it, you will not really taking refuge in Buddha. This last part here, sadly, is a bit of a dig on other schools, so we can probably just let that one poof away and focus on the first part. That's not me here and Buddha over there. It's Buddha taking refuge as Buddha, in Buddha, through Buddha, and like Dogen famously misquotes the Lotus Sutra a little bit, saying it takes a Buddha and a Buddha to practice. So it takes a Buddha and a Buddha to take refuge in Buddha. And this is a good recasting, like so many Mahayana teachings. It helps us see the way we just default to this separation, right? We don't even think about it. We think, I'm standing here, I'm doing these bows, I'm doing my practice, I'm making my practice period plan, I'm taking refuge in Buddha, and there's this gap, right, between me and some other thing. So Buddha is saying, and Thich Nhat Hanh is casting it with his own language, don't do that. Don't do that. I want to adjust Ty's wise words here a little bit. He says, he translates, when you take refuge in Buddha, you must truly want to become Buddha. Maybe better to say, when you take refuge, you must remember that you are Buddha. Just remember that you are Buddha. Because who would want, you know? So that's how you take refuge in Buddha. You're Buddha. And Dogen says much the same about Zazen in his Dogeny way, you know, that we don't sit Zazen in order to become Buddha. We sit Zazen as an expression of Buddha, you know, of being Buddha nature. Which is another misquote, famous misquote of his. He was looking at something that said, we have Buddha nature, and he said, no, 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 we are Buddha nature. So I've got good company in rewriting stuff. And then the work is to actually mean it, right? So that's Buddha. Remember, the Buddha in the sutra is talking to Ugra, the serious lay practitioner. Then he says, to take refuge in the Dharma means firstly to respect the Dharma and the one who teaches the Dharma. One should abide in the Dharma, train in the Dharma, and support the Dharma. However, that is not enough. One should use the Dharma as a source of energy, a force, a tool to work with, an instrument to liberate oneself and others. One should make the vow that once one has realized the highest path, one will bring the right Dharma to share with all species. Only then is it truly taking refuge in the Dharma. If you just bow with your head and say, I take refuge in the Dharma, you do not have the strong aspiration to practice, then it is not really taking refuge in the Dharma. So this is a little wordy. Well, let's hear it again and see if we can parse it out. Firstly, to respect the Dharma and the one who teaches the Dharma. Then to abide in the Dharma, so we're really in it, right? We're not over here looking at it as if it was out there. We're abiding in the Dharma, we're training in the Dharma, and we're supporting the Dharma. Sounds like Sangha life. But that's not enough. And one's attention should really perk up, you know, that's not enough. Like, well, wait a minute. That sounds like enough, doesn't it? Does that sound like enough? Wouldn't you be really happy if you respected the Dharma and those who teach the Dharma, abided in the Dharma and trained in the Dharma and supported the Dharma? Wouldn't that be like great on your CV? You know? But no, it's not enough, he says. So what else do we need? Well, share the Dharma. Share the Dharma. It's not just for us, right? It's for all beings, and the other trick there is we are included in all beings. Use the Dharma as a source of energy, a force, a tool to work with, an instrument to liberate oneself and others, underlining the and. One should make the vow that once one has realized the highest path, one will bring the right Dharma to share with all species. Only then is it truly taking refuge in the Dharma. Don't just bow your head and say it, you know. Don't just say it. Really feel it. So that's the Dharma. And then lastly, to take refuge in the Sangha is to take refuge in one's community of practice. Straightforward. And one should respect the monks and nuns even if they are practicing the Shravaka path. That's the dig again. Oh well. This was written by humans, right? But I think it's relevant to us because much as I read something like that and I go, tisk, tisk, you know, you Mahayanists of, you know, the 3rd century, you could have been nicer. If I think about it for a minute, and probably, I don't want to assume, but I would guess if you thought about it for a minute, you might notice that we do the same thing. It's so easy to cast others as less than for one reason or the other. And Zen has a remarkable ability with our incredible attention to details to come up with completely meaningless and unimportant reasons to put other people down. You're bowing the wrong way. Ridiculous, right? There's no wrong way. So we I think should not be pride, and probably that's why we should leave these little sectarian digs in there, because then we need to turn the light inward and say, well, gosh, you know, am I really fully inclusive in seeing all the other practitioners, whether they come to the Zen hall or not, right, as fully with me and fully me, you know, fully practicing with great integrity? Or do I find little ways to slice people off by how they look, how they talk, how they practice, how they hold their hands, gassho or something. Maybe we need another vow in our 4 great bodhisattva vows. We could split off from the one about delusions to have a special one about judgment. Wouldn't that be good? Endless stupid judgments of others are boundless, I vow to recognize and release them all, that would be good. Should we add that? Honest, It's easy to look good and noble, especially when you're not talking, while your mind jumps around and saying, yeah, he's nice, but guys, come on. Right? Oh well. Conditioned minds do what they do, but we have this incredible opportunity with practice to work with them. So anyway, I wanted to give you a little sneak preview so you get super excited about Monday, as I am, to find out how we explore this deeply. But it's interesting that in the sutra, the Buddha starts right there with the 3, taking refuge in the 3 treasures. And then the next section is something like, Ugra asks, oh yeah, how do you do that? And the Buddha basically says, remember the 3 treasures. Just keep recollecting. He uses the word recollection in the translation. Recollect this, remember this. Which is beautiful because the root word that was translated as mindfulness means to remember, right? To remember. What are we doing, It's easy to forget. We're going to have a lot of vows if I have anything to do with it. We also need one about forgetting, right? Forgetting my way is constant, I vow to remember. So it's a tricky thing we're doing. It's hard to remember. We're surrounded by seeds and encouragement of judgment and division, right? And we have seen how deeply that has taken hold in our national conversation, and it's so sad and scary. And I think the practitioners through the millennia have always felt a little countercultural, so I think that really does seem to be true right now, doesn't it, in this moment? Not countercultural in that rejecting way that maybe there was a threat of in the hippie days, but countercultural in a corrective way, countering a culture of division with a culture of non-division, right, of interconnection. And so we can take unfortunate inspiration from all the examples of division, but we can also pay attention to all the examples of wise, compassionate practice that surround us, and really choose to feel inspiration from others, from each other, from our dear friends and colleagues all over the planet, So I want to share this morning about a deeply committed lay practitioner that I've had the honor to practice with. It's just one example from my life, and maybe this will encourage you to think of other examples in your life too, even if you never met this person. So I want to tell you a little story about how I got to know this person. In about 2016 or so, I got a message from the Willows Retirement Community, which is right by St. Joseph's Hospital here in Bellingham. And it was that they were offering a class on Eastern spirituality or something like that, and would I come talk to the residents about Buddhism? And I usually say yes, even if I don't know what's going on. So I did. And so I did go talk about Buddhism, but I was at that time also really focused on the sort of non-religious is the wrong word, but the sort of everyday language of mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction, and the organization I started to teach that kind of became my day job for quite a while. So I had that in mind, so I'm sure I talked about that too, You don't have to be talking about Buddha to do this, although the Buddha does recommend it. And somehow out of that visit was an invitation arrived to do a class on meditation and mindfulness, not specifically Buddhism, but meditation and mindfulness. So I did that, and it was really fun for me to go to the retirement community and do a class. The students, mostly in their late 70s and 80s, and you could just kind of feel the wisdom in the room, and fun for me to broaden my sort of scope a little, be in a different place than usual. And out of that class was a meditation group was born. So the Willows Retirement Community has had a meditation group that has met ever since. And I've helped to take care of it. I've been going once a month until last Tuesday, for however many years that is. Some pandemic interruptions, for sure. And one of the central members of that group, who I remember from the very, very first visit, was a woman then in her early 80s named Maggie. And after a while I discovered that she was Maggie Weisberg, the mother of an acquaintance of mine, and a good friend actually of Hannah's, who's listening in the kitchen, the mother of Saul Weisberg, who I admire partly because he started a wonderful environmental education organization called the North Cascades Institute. And I was actually partly inspired by him when I created Mindfulness Northwest, just to up and go and, like to hear that Paul Simon song and then just go do it, Make yourself an institute. Or was it call yourself an institute? I don't know if Paul Simon ever had a board, though. He skipped that part. So I admired Saul and knew him a bit, and here was his mother in my meditation group. That was cool. And another kind of only in Bellingham connection, or maybe it's only in Sebastopol or wherever you live, but only in your hometown kind of thing. I pretty soon figured out that I also knew this family because when I first came to town in the 1990s, one of the items on my sort of random looking resume was preschool teacher. And I taught preschool for a year at the university. And I had Saul and Shelley's 3-year-old in my class. So I have had interactions with 3 generations of this family. Not like a family friend, don't go over for Thanksgiving, but, a real sense of connection. Kind of like that word en in the Enmei-juku Kanangyo we talked about last week. That causal feeling of affinity and connection, and this is leading to something here, even if I don't totally understand what. So I just felt really close to Maggie kind of right away. And I was very increasingly impressed with her as a lay practitioner in her 90s. And that's when she started meditation. She made time pretty early on to sit daily, and she would report back often about the effort she was making in her daily life to meet her stresses and challenges with mindfulness, with curiosity, with a kind of not, beginner's not knowing everything mind, to check herself out and wonder about her thinking, to reframe things in a certain way that she realized was more skillful for herself. She really put the practice to work in her daily life. It wasn't just a way to have a little peace during her morning practice sessions in her apartment at the Willows Retirement Community. As far as I know, she never went to a Zen center or any other formal meditation center, but only meditated in her own way and in the mindfulness style that I had suggested to her through Mindfulness Northwest. And then almost all of her practice, was right there at the Willows. And in the meditation group, which ended up meeting twice a month because that was more realistic than weekly. I remember at least one time she and her son and his wife Saul did come to like a little mindfulness retreat or other that I did, and occasionally do presentations at the bookstore. I remember a bunch of the residents came. I think the Willows bus dumped off a bunch of Willows residents one time at Village Books, because I gave a talk at noon, which was a good time, better than the evening for them to come visit. And when I would go for the monthly visits of the group, I don't never want to put words in people's mouth, but I'm always curious, like, how are you practicing, and how can we learn to really apply this, and And I want to be careful not to presume that I know what it would be like to be 85 or 90 and the challenges you're facing. I can make stuff up in my head, but that's just that. And I was often so grateful for Maggie, because we would do a practice and I would ask how it's going, you know. Often Maggie would be the first to share, but sometimes a little self-conscious that she was often the first to share, but very humble in her sharing. And she would say, "Oh, this reminds me of the other day in my apartment where I realized I couldn't reach down to pick up the thing I dropped," or whatever the thing was that she suddenly realized she couldn't do. I got frustrated, I took a breath, and I remembered that there are so many things I still can do, and then found some way to deal with the situation. At one point she told us, I actually decided I better make a list, because it's still a pretty long list of things I can do. I was just so impressed, and that inspired the other practitioners in the group to be like, "Oh, okay, I see now. That makes sense." The other thing I learned about aging, which I suppose is true for all of us at any age, is regrets are an increasingly important part of your practice. At least that's what they reported to me. In your late 80s and 90s, and especially if you have the resources to be at a retirement community, it's a pretty nice one, you don't have so many responsibilities anymore. You have plenty of complex relationships still, but you have plenty of time to think. And one of the things that comes up are the things that you regret from the past, including things that you have buried and not thought of, for decades or even from when they happened. And Maggie was a leader there too, talking about, I remembered in meditation about this thing I did. It was really a rotten thing to do, and I've been practicing with that. I remember that was one of the few times we had an argument, me and Maggie. She was sharing about that, and I said, I think just to be reassuring, not great Dharma teacher behavior necessarily, I said something like, "Well, you were doing your best back then." She immediately shot back, "No, I wasn't. I could have done better. But I'm working on forgiving myself." I'm like, oh, I didn't bow because of the setting, but that's how I felt. Thank you for that teaching. It's not just about mollifying ourselves, right? Oh, I did my best. What can I learn from that? How can I change and grow? How can I be Buddha? One time she emailed me a little essay, short little essay, which we published in our email newsletter and sent it out to 10,000 people. I didn't tell her it was that many. So I want to share Maggie's little essay with you. Maybe you can relate. A few weeks ago, I decided to meditate outside on my deck. It was a beautiful day. A slight breeze was rustling through the trees, birds twittering, sky a startling blue with no clouds. So as I was adjusting myself in the special seat I had prepared, with the pillow just in the right place supporting my back, focusing on my breathing, I was startled by loud, terrible noises. I had somehow forgotten the major construction project going on next door, where Peace Health is building a parking garage. It's right next to their place. And apparently lunch hour had just ended, and everyone was back at work. Jackhammers digging, trucks roaring and beeping as they backed up, hammers banging, cranes dumping loads of concrete. I was furious, filled with righteous anger. How am I supposed to meditate in this awful noise? It's not fair. They're ruining this beautiful day, etc., etc. I was fuming, trying to ignore the noise and concentrate on my breath. Somehow a phrase came to my mind. Make everything the path. And it was suddenly clear that the only thing I had was this moment. And this moment was noise. And it didn't matter if I liked it or not. This is what is here right now. How am I going to live in this moment? I can continue stewing and trying to meditate anyway. I could go inside and close all the windows so the noise was muted. I could meditate later when they stopped working. But I didn't want any of those. I recognized I wanted to be mad. I had a right to be mad. But I didn't want that either. So I got curious. Was it possible not to be mad? Was it possible to accept the noise, to allow it to be, to let it become part of me, to listen without judging, to just be there with the noise? Something shifted. I began to distinguish different sounds, to really hear the roaring, the swishing, the beeping, the banging, scraping, screeching, plopping as an orchestra of sound. I could still hear the birds and the wind. I still could be aware of the blue sky. And in sinking into the listening and breathing and being, I could feel my forehead relaxing, my jaw unclenching, my shoulders lowering, my toes uncurling. I was actually smiling. And how right, how good everything felt. The longer I listened, the more the noise became just another kind of sound, as natural as a waterfall, a woodpecker, pouring rain. These were sounds of humanity, men in work doing important, needed work, glad to have good paying jobs to support their families. I sat my usual 30 minutes focusing on the sounds, not identifying or analyzing them anymore, just listening, amused and amazed by the sheer variety of tone and texture. It felt powerful and peaceful and alive. I often meditate outside now. Sometimes there's noise, sometimes not. Sometimes it's people talking or dogs barking, sometimes it's silent, which is a different challenge to accept. There's so much to experience, ... That's where she ends her writing. So much to experience, ... Isn't that wonderful? May we all be so skilled in our practice. And you can substitute whatever you want, where she talks about the sound of construction, right? What would you put in there? What got your goat recently? I don't know Maggie's biography particularly. I don't know if she had a career or where she lived before Bellingham. New York roots seem likely, just listening to her accent. Jewish family. I know she had a long marriage, but like many women who lived longer lives, outlived her husband by decades. 2 or 3 at least. I remember her talking about the process she had to go through to shift her relationships with her children and her grandchildren, and recently her great-grandchildren. Shifting to being more spacious, kinder, non-controlling. She didn't have to mother anybody now. She needed to grandmother and great-grandmother them and love them up. I appreciated everyone who came to that Willows meditation group. They're really sincere, interesting people. And I could see some of my biases come and go and come and go. Little old ladies falling asleep during the meditation, right? It would be easy to trivialize somebody like that. And of course my mind did a bit. Judgments are boundless. But the longer I went, the more I understood that these are Buddhas. And that I was lucky to be among them. And that I had a lot to learn as I went from 49 to 59. And Maggie went from her early 90s to her early 100s. And being in that situation, of course, the group lost people, sometimes very core members, and we'd miss them. Some still living, but they'd had their health shift in such a way that they couldn't live at the Willows anymore, which requires a certain level of independence. I don't know exactly the line, but different places have different lines of what services they can provide. And some members died. And a few of them I got to sit with them in their apartments by their deathbeds before they passed. Usually we'd meditate a little and I'd read a poem. But Maggie was remarkably still going strong. She turned 100 a year and a half ago. She was amazed herself. And she was actually one of the few people in this group of elders who didn't really have much pain in her body. was still pretty capable. Of course, used a walker. At the beginning of the meeting, there's like a walker parking lot in the sides of the room, and the chairs kind of roll around too. So if they need to shift position in the room, like I put them in small groups, they kind of scoot the chairs around because it's way too much work to stand up. Sometimes I push them around. Sometime in her middle of her 100th year, I did get a call from her daughter that she was hospitalized. Turned out to be nothing too serious, but it was enough that she decided to be officially on hospice care, palliative care only. It's enough for Maggie to realize, I don't want them doing some big thing to me. When it's my time, and probably that soon. But like all people who are alive, she was completely alive, and I knew in my head she was 100, and then this last March, 101. But she was so alive, Remembered something Norman shared with us long ago, that he recognized when he was working with hospice volunteers that it's a mistake to think that you're with somebody who's dying. That's a very us and them thing. A, we're all dying, and B, nobody's dying, right? We're completely alive until we're not. So I saw Maggie a month ago, I think. And then a couple of days before the meeting I was to go to the group again this last Tuesday, I got this email from her son, Saul. It said, our mother, Maggie Weisberg, passed away peacefully with her family at her side on Saturday, September 20th, 2025, in her apartment at the Willows in Bellingham, Washington. She was 101 years old, awake, alert, and aware to the end. Maggie was grateful that MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying, is available in Washington State, giving her the opportunity to choose when, where, and how she would die. Maggie wanted to share some personal reflections, attached PDF, about the last months of her life with her family and friends. We're working on an extended obituary. We'll send it to you when it's completed. Thank you for being a part of Maggie's community. And there was a note specifically to me from Maggie too, which made me cry. So with Maggie's invitation to share this with people who knew her, and now you do, so I feel good sharing this, I want to share the final teachings of this particular emanation of Buddha for inspiration in our lay practice. May we continue to the last day, just like she did. It's titled End of Life Reflections, Maggie Weisberg, 2/24/1924, 2/24/1924 to 9/20/2025. So she wrote her own death date on her own reflections. And she wrote, it's been final for some time now. Saturday, September 20th, 2025, the date of my death, my choice. I am relieved, calm, content, it feels right. I can't say why I feel so clear about this. How I know this is the time, it seems obvious. I've had a long, meaningful life with love and passion, sadness and joy, idealism and disillusion. I've known good people, been part of a caring community, a wonderful family. I'm proud of how I lived my life, what I believed and what I tried to do. Many things didn't succeed, and I made many mistakes. I've forgiven myself for not being perfect. I can finally allow myself to just be me. Close to death, I feel very alive. I observe and reflect on large and small things, curious, amazed, and overwhelmed, coming to terms with being human. Where do we come from? How do we get so wonderful? How do we get so terrible? How did we survive? How did I survive? How will we get through this horrible time of Trump, Gaza, climate change, environmental catastrophe? I believe in human beings, ordinary people all over the world loving each other, raising children, mostly doing no harm, living together with reasonable understanding and compassion, and disagreeing without killing each other. They are here in my small world, friends and family, each a speck, part of the universe, changing it in ways I can't imagine. When the time is right, ordinary people do extraordinary things. To my surprise, old age has been calmer, more interesting, more fun than I ever imagined. All the important life decisions have been made: marriage, friends, children, career, ideologies. There are very few things I have to do. I do what I enjoy. Talk with family and friends, meditate, read, reflect, do improv, watch movies. I feel strangely content, safe, and at ease. My job now is to know myself, to cherish being alive, to accept my place in this vastness. I examine my life not to analyze or judge, not to second-guess choices, but to be open, vulnerable, and honest with myself. I see different parts of my life falling into place, like a giant puzzle. Judgments, mistakes, and times of despair mix with times of joy and new understanding. Am I still finding missing pieces? And I am still finding missing pieces, some that surprise and delight, some that make me cringe. I am finally learning what it means to be present, to pay attention, focusing on who I am right now. What's here right now? This has become a habit, and I'm constantly surprised to see how this works. It's a quiet way to be, conscious of myself and at the same time detached. I observe myself from the outside, unique and alone, yet extraordinarily aware and connected. I'm grateful for the mysterious turns and twists of my life that brought me here. With this family, these friends, this apartment on this piece of the world, it has been wonderful to have had these many years, to see my kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids grow up, to get to know and appreciate each of them. I know they will take care of each other and the earth as best they can. There's no place I'd rather be right now, sitting in this chair, conscious of the people I love who love me, aware of the cactus on the windowsill, pictures on the wall, a slight breeze cools my feet, a quiet sunset begins to paint the sky. Maggie Weisberg. That last paragraph feels like an important poem to me. There's no place I'd rather be right now, sitting in this chair, conscious of the people I love and who love me, aware of the cactus on the windowsill, pictures on the wall, a slight breeze cools my feet, a quiet sunset begins to paint the sky. So thank you, Maggie. Thank you for your teachings and the privilege of practicing with you. Maggie would never say that she took refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, although she'd be curious to know what the heck I was talking about. We'd have a good conversation. But I think she absolutely did take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha on every moment. So may we all pay attention to these powerful lay practitioners in our lives too, much as we can enjoy these wacky rascals from the mythic times, They have a lot to teach us too. But the Buddhas are right here. Right here. And when they get older, they move to retirement communities and keep teaching. Bodhisattvas are everywhere. It's our responsibility to notice and learn and grow and receive their teachings. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, helping to break in our place. I have to admit, I had a little